Inshallah, Imam Khalid will be starting now. Imam Khalid has a flight at 6:45. He just got back, like we said, so he's going to, inshallah ta'ala, do one more session, inshallah ta'ala. So please do give him your full attention. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Okay, brothers and sisters, continuing on our journey through the life of one of the most dynamic and trailblazing and transformative figures in the last part of the 20th century, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. We talked about how after Malcolm's mother had her nervous breakdown and his father had been killed, an insurance company claiming that it was because of his own suicide, but all of the facts pointed to something very different. That Malcolm, in his school career, was just completely turned around by this racist teacher that totally discouraged him from pursuing any kind of profession other than doing something with his hands. And so after a few months, when Malcolm was 14 years old, he actually moved to live with his sister, Ella Collins, who lived in Boston, Massachusetts. And Ella was what is called in American society his half-sister. She was a product of a union with Earl Little, and not Louise, Malcolm's mother, but with another woman. And Ella always took a liking when you read the story and talk to the family members. They say that Ella always found something special about this mischievous, smart young man, Malcolm. And so Ella was quick to take Malcolm in. And Malcolm found that the area in which Ella lived, in the Roxbury section of Boston at that time, was just a little too tame for his liking. He wanted to experience the life, and some people say the low life, of Boston. He was not satisfied in this upper middle class neighborhood in which his sister was living in. So he wanted to get out and experience some things that his young, youthful nature was calling upon him to do. And then Malcolm lived with Ella until he was about, and the ages vary depending on who's telling the story, until he was about 17 or 18 years old, where he ended up moving briefly to Flint, Michigan, and then he moved to Harlem. He moved to a place of bright lights and fast living and fast cars and fast women and fast everything. And by the time Malcolm got to Harlem, he had this flaming, what you would call, conk. It was an attempt during the period, and the style was made popular by African-American musicians, particularly jazz musicians. They would put what they call a process into their hair to turn their kind of woolly hair into more stringy hair to imitate the hair of white folks. And Malcolm's hair was naturally red. And so he had this conch up on top of his head, and it was a flame, they said it was a flaming red. It was like his hair was on fire when you see it, as bright as the hair was. And he started to dress and learned to dress in the style of Harlem at that time. And one of the styles was the style called a zoot suit. It was a large, and actually some of the suits we wear today remind me of zoot suits. I've seen a lot of people walking around, and except for the colors, they look like the zoot suits. They were very long coats, and oftentimes the colors were red and bright gold and yellow and really loud colors. And Malcolm started to dress in this manner to adapt his dress and his lifestyle to the environment that he chose in Harlem at this particular time. And so it was nothing but trouble for Malcolm as it relates to his social well-being, because he began to get involved in petty kinds of hustles. He began to get into petty kind of games with gambling, and he began to start to steer white customers who would come into Harlem at that time who wanted to try to find black females to have illicit temporary relationships with. He became a steerer. And when he knew that folks wanted to do this, Malcolm was somebody who could tell you, well, you give me a little money, I can point you to where you need to go. And so Malcolm's lifestyle became one, as he described it himself after he left himself and Allah elevated him from this. He talks about how far he had sunk into the mud of America that no one, he said, he felt, could have morally sunk to the level of depravity, as he described himself. And I think some of this description was actually over on a kind of exaggeration. Because when you really find out the things that he was doing, even though they were illegal and illicit and unethical, they didn't represent the kind of depravity that Malcolm later would describe to Alex Haley in his autobiography, and we'll get to that in a moment. But whether it was this stuck deep in the moral mud of New York City in America or whatever it was not a lifestyle that was conducive for someone trying to elevate themselves and their consciousness about who they were. Malcolm then moved back to Boston in 1946 to live with his sister, temporarily to live with Ella again in Boston. And Malcolm took some of the skills, the anti-social skills that he had learned while he was in New York, to go back to Boston to organize a little criminal gang. And they began to go and rob houses in the rich and exclusive areas of Boston, Massachusetts. And Malcolm made the mistake, and they had broken into a house and they had stolen a watch. And Malcolm wanted to keep that watch rather than try to fence it. He was attracted by the watch. And so he took it to a watch repair place to get it repaired. And when he went back to pick it up, he was arrested for grand larceny and theft because the watch had been reported missing. So Malcolm goes back to pick up his watch. It's not what you saw on the Spike Lee 1992 X movie where he was actually in the apartment trying to get another conch and the police ran in on him. No, Malcolm was arrested when he was going to get his watch, what wasn't his watch, but the watch that had been stolen that he had put in for repair. And he was arrested at this point. And included in his gang were 2 white females. And Malcolm would later say that he got 8 to 10 years on his first offense, not because of the nature of his crime, but he was bold enough to involve white females in his criminal activities or even to have associations. So his first offense in which he was prosecuted for was an offense that would normally carry a much lighter sentence, but he got 8 to 10 years on his first time out. He and his friend, Malcolm Shorty Jarvis, were sentenced to the same thing and put into the same prison. I had mentioned that Malcolm was not a person who was illiterate when he went to prison, and I want to just give you an example of how literate he was. Malcolm was underdeveloped intellectually. Malcolm was underdeveloped in his academics, but he was by no means illiterate or slow or anything like this. When Malcolm was first tested in the Charleston State Prison in Massachusetts, he scored in his reading good, very good. He scored in math, that he had a high average in math, that his abstract reasoning and range of information was superior. his sister, older sister Hilda, encouraged Malcolm that now that you've rekindled this brain inside of your head, why don't you start taking academic classes? So this is what he started to do. And some of the classes, and all this stuff is documented, some of the classes that he took plain English, he took elementary German, he took elementary Latin, and he got excellent scores in every academic course that he took upon entering the Charleston State Prison and any other prison that he was in for the next 8 years. We find also at Charleston State Prison there was this inmate by the name of John Bembry. And Bembry went by the name of Bimby. And Bimby was someone that did not involve himself in the nonsense that was going on in the prisons, and he was someone that encouraged Malcolm to start reading books that could be of value to you. Quit reading, as Malcolm described it himself, quit reading cowboy books. Quit reading books that have no value other than you're perhaps learning a few words. Read something that can enrich you and so that you can be a better person when you get out. After about a year and a half, Malcolm's family began to send him letters, particularly his brother Filbert, who was a member of the Nation of Islam. Malcolm's other siblings had also joined the nation. But Malcolm said that when his brother Filbert sent him a letter talking about this Elijah Muhammad and the true teachings for the Asiatic black man in the wilderness of North America, that he just immediately rejected it. He didn't want to hear what his brother Filbert was saying, so he just completely dismissed it. Because from a religious standpoint, in prison at this point, Malcolm was identified and called Satan. Not because he looked like some caricature of the devil, but because of his just iconoclastic, nothing was sacred to Malcolm. And he was calling himself an atheist at this time. So when his family members started to send him letters talking about this religion for the black man, Malcolm said he just dismissed it out of hand. I don't want to hear what Filbert has to say. He joins everything. He's been every kind of Christian, so now he's just found something else crazy to be a part of. But when his younger brother Reginald, who was Malcolm's crime protege before Malcolm was arrested, wrote him and said, Malcolm, you need to stop eating pork, and you need to stop smoking cigarettes, and I'll show you how to get out of prison. But this was something that actually caught Malcolm's attention. So when Reginald finally came to visit him, Malcolm was more receptive to these teachings that Reginald was saying, that this man by the name of Elijah Muhammad, who said that he was a prophet of God, who was commissioned by Allah, by God himself, to be the messenger to the black people in America. And included in the theology or the mythology of this particular organization was that white people were the actual creation of a big-headed scientist by the name of Yaku, who on the island of Paphos 44,000 years ago genetically engineered by bringing light-skinned African Americans together until you keep doing it, until now you have white people. So they said that Yaku, the big-head scientist, genetically engineered and created the white race, but this was a devil race. Now keep in mind that we're talking about a time when the group psychology of so many African American people, especially those in the ghettos around the United States, was one of low to no self-esteem. That the psychology of oppression had impacted these folks, our folks, so much that many from the African American community were receptive to the idea that no, you're not someone who is inferior to white folks, you are superior. As a matter of fact, Yaqub created them, and he was a black man. He was an evil scientist. And so Malcolm eventually, in a relatively short period of time, embraced this ideology of the Nation of Islam. And he even, as it was a practice of the organization, for every individual, man or woman who wanted to join, to write a letter to Elijah Muhammad, who was claiming to have been the prophet of Allah, the prophet of God. Write this letter. And you do it perfectly. And I know personally people who were friends of mine, who were members of the Nation of Islam, who would send off their letters, and these were people who halfway were, I'm not going to say halfway, they were intelligent people. And these were folks who would send their letters off and have it sent back to them. Said, no, you didn't curve this right, or something was wrong with it. So it was a process of earning an X, earning acceptance, earning this right to replace your so-called slave name. Like my last name is Griggs. And I literally know where the plantation was in Southern Virginia, where my Griggs part of my name came from. I know the plantation. I know the ancestor who lived to be over 113 years old, who told my father all of these stories about the horrors of slavery and all of these things. And so when I embraced Islam through the Sunni channel, I did consider changing my last name, but because I knew who that ancestor was and he was a slave, I decided, well, that's okay. That was my condition. It was my family condition, and I kept the name. But this was not the case in the Nation of Islam at that time and for a lot of years to come. So Malcolm joined the Nation of Islam. Now Malcolm changed in the way he was presenting himself in the nation. I don't have the time to go through a lot of details, but Malcolm was released from prison in 1952. And he moved to Detroit, Michigan to live with his brother Philbert. He was working in a furniture store. His brother got him a job working in a furniture store. But it was in a very short period of time when Elijah Muhammad realized that there was something special about this guy, Malcolm. And so he started to invite Malcolm to his home. And he realized that, yes, it wasn't just intuition, that this person, Malcolm, this guy, Malcolm X, has potential to build this Nation of Islam, because you see, even though the Nation of Islam started in 1930, at the time of Malcolm's release from prison in 1952, a liberal estimate of the number of people in the Nation of Islam at that time was less than 400 people across the nation. But Elijah Muhammad saw something in Malcolm, and he quickly appointed him as his assistant minister in Detroit. And then he sent Malcolm to Philadelphia to try to build it up, and in very short time, wherever Malcolm would go, there would be 100 at least people joining the Nation of Islam, just because of the charisma and the persistence and the organizational brilliance of Malcolm. The organization, from the time Malcolm was out in a very short period of time, developed from this small group of people to a very large organization. And Malcolm, and I'm going to speed through a lot of this history in the interest of time, and then the period that Malcolm was in the Nation of Islam, it was a period when the civil rights movement in this country, the modern day civil rights movement,